Hey everyone, Sean Maloney, Digital Business Masters. Another DBM strategy call, our weekly look at all things blockchain, all things digital assets, all things Bitcoin, and why it's important. This is by far the most valuable information on the planet that you'll find. Okay, not necessarily what I'm doing, but certainly what this workshop is made up of is the most valuable information on the planet. There's just no question about that. Hence, we're so passionate and we work so hard to help other people understand what we've now known for well over a decade and been working through it. Yeah, we were working through it and we continue to work through it. That's why we're successful, because we don't stop. That's what you do in business, in case you haven't noticed. All right, so we'll look at the big picture in the first part of this call. The second part of this call is all about how to apply the big picture in your business. So you can access that through the Systems Plus subscriptions over in the DBM Academy. You'll see the link below. Very important. It's all very well realizing what I'm just about to talk about. It's all very well getting educated, understanding what I'm just about to talk about. But those things are useless without application, no matter what that application is. And you must carry on that application once you've started it. Yeah? A quote I picked up today as I was preparing for this session is the cowards never started and the weak died along the way. That sums up the journey of what it takes to obviously get a business started and maintained, but equally what it is to get involved with digital assets over the past 10 years. The cowards never started and the weak die along the way. It's just the way it is. So to be able to apply is where the most professional, the most successful, the most ambitious, the most fortuitous, and the most courageous live. Our job is to provide motivation, support, and structure to help as many people get across the plains and to the new world as possible every single week. In doing that, we're not giving you any financial advice whatsoever. We're not interested in giving you financial advice. If you want to get across the plains from east to west, if you want to survive and get where you need to be for the promised land, you're going to have to do it on your own. You have to become sovereign. But it's a lot easier when you're with other people on the wagon trail. So you stick together. You keep an eye out for each other. You support each other. You get there together. That is an individual process underneath any educational mechanism. That's what DBM Academy represents in the digital space. But we're not here to do it for you. We can't drive your wagon for you. Why we're so passionate about it? Well, I say this every week because I have to, because if you don't understand this basic fundamental, you will not make it. You will give up trying because you will just not understand critical mass and what it takes to build a balance sheet to a big enough level, no matter what, for that balance sheet to perpetually fund the cash flows of your business so you can fund liabilities. The vast majority of people in the world, by definition, believe that you go out every day, you exchange time and skill for currency, and then you put that currency straight into liabilities in the form of a purchase. Since 1971, since the full fiat system was incarnated on this planet, it is impossible for the average person to be able to do that as well as preserve purchasing power. Therefore, you get a situation as people get older and older and older, they're running out of time and they've still not figured out, even into their 40s and 50s and beyond, that all the while they needed to be accruing accretive, cash flowing assets. So the whole business model, everything that we talk about today, and all the fundamentals around macro and geopolitical mechanisms that are making this very easy for us now, are all built on the premise that, of course, you go out there and earn an income. Of course, you have to go out there and provide value to others in whatever form that takes, a job, self-employment, whatever you're doing. But you must put a portion of that devaluing fiat currency into accretive assets that provide you cash flow that then fund liabilities. Your balance sheet funds your business. And in part two of this call, as we've done now for some weeks, I'll show you the model we operate just with Bitcoin itself to be able to perpetually utilize an accretive asset such as Bitcoin to fund our lives. And obviously the job is to accelerate that by moving as much income as you can get your hands on, whatever mechanism you're choosing to create income from, into a balance sheet that allows that to become something you live your rest of your days with. That's what we'll look at in detail in part 2 of this call. You can access part 2 in the link below. On a much broader level, very simple. We own assets, we build assets, we grow assets, we hold assets, we never sell assets, and we push them towards cash flowing activities. Now that's the hard bit. This is what I mean when I talk about, cowards never start and we die along the way. A lot of people try this, but don't have the fortitude and resilience to what it takes to get across to the West. They die trying, right? It's not easy. It really isn't. In any business, whether you're buying a piece of machinery, whether you're looking at equipment, whether you're looking at an office, staff, supply chain, regulation, legislation, customer demand, market demand, it's always going to move. It's always going to move. So whatever supply base you've decided to set your business up on which you're leveraging a proportion of your assets over to create cash flow, is what you've got. So you need to continue that if there is a viable entity on which to continue it with. And if there's not, then you shift and you go again and again and again until you find the right mix in your factory, the right machinery of your factory to be able to earn consistent income in the form of USDT, but it could come in other assets as well, of course. Take a breather in USDT, but not for long, because USDT, equivalent to US dollar, removes 10% per year, 7 to 10% per year of purchasing power from your gift. So we don't hang around in devaluing fiat. We immediately move that across to accretive assets such as Bitcoin and start all over again. And if you're good, you do this Friday through Friday. If you're just getting out started, maybe monthly or quarterly. Yeah. Either way, it's a trifecta that you continue every single day. We do it in 3 broad churches at DBM. The DBM model that we established many years ago understood this very early on. So early sometimes that we go into stuff that's maybe a little bit too high risk, maybe a little bit unyieldy, but what we're going to do, you've got to push, you've got to drive, you've got to investigate, you've got to build relationships, there's an element of trust involved, and that's okay. That's okay. You're learning every single time. We work predominantly, obviously, as I've said for years, just own one Bitcoin. Just own one Bitcoin. And the way we do that is we simply dollar cost average, no matter what. So we take a proportion of our skill and time and energy every single day, and we reallocate that to Bitcoin. Anybody that's been doing that as long as DBM's been around, well over a decade now, is way in front, has got huge amounts of leverage to work with to be able to move their businesses forward without a new dollar going in at all, because you're just leveraging your existing balance sheet. Again, I'll show you that in part 2. As I say, we're not just interested in equity. Right, Bitcoin's all about equity. It's changing as we're finding TradFi platforms that allow us to create a dividend yield. That's brand new. That's only been around for the past 6 months. So we're doing other things over in Bitcoin now that allow us to drive yield as well. But up until very recently, it's not been possible. So we've been going into DeFi and looking at as many different mechanisms, 14 different industry sectors, actually, dozens of different business projects and platforms that we operate with that allow us to take a proportion of our asset base and create a yield. Yeah, we drive for up to 10% a month, for example. We're looking all the time for things like this. Is it easy? No. Is there things that go wrong and change? Absolutely. We just expect that because we're used to running factories and we're used to walking in every day to our factory and having a problem with a piece of machinery or a supplier or a member of staff hasn't turned up. We're used to that mentality. That's where our mindset is. We expect problems. Therefore, we're not surprised when they happen, but most of all, we've got contingency. That's why we're so well spread across 14 different industry sectors, because our job is to maintain yield, maintain cash flow every month, no matter what. A number of years ago, we also figured out how to look at projects that provide equity and yield Now, holistically, you're only going to find this in the altcoin space. You're not going to find this in Bitcoin. And you're not going to find it in smart contracts. You're only going to find this in altcoins, because altcoins allow you to take an ownership position of a particular coin, or more relevant, a token, and then hold that token, put it into liquidity, put it into pools that provide a yield that allow you, every single day to create an income in the token, and then allocate that token to various use cases. Trading is the obvious one that we use, right? And that creates the ongoing yield, the ongoing profit, and we just completely work every single day, reallocating all the time our assets back onto itself. You've got all sorts of challenges: regulation, fees, legislation, market behavior, human behavior, marketers, overselling, underselling. You've got all sorts of problems to deal with if you want to look at it like that, or you look at it as all sorts of opportunities. That's going to be down to your mindset. Yeah. You'll find that people who work in this industry and want to get things for free, they have a very, very basic mindset of everything is owed to them, and I'll just register and everybody will give me what I want simply because I've registered. Right? They're not going to go anywhere. Then you've got the skills people in the DBM Academy who've got a mindset of, no, I know I need to do something, but I'm just not going to do enough. I'm just going to do the bare minimum. Okay? And you'll find that that's a long road. That's a long, long, tough road. And then the Systems Plus people, the income people, they've got the right mindset because they accelerate. They're invested in themselves and they understand exactly how to move forward because they're working tightly in these three mechanisms with strategy, conversation, support, and conversation. Okay? So we've exemplified that inside a subscription system that works at the very beginning on mindset. But what we found over the years is there's mindset all the way down this path. And you've got different mindsets all the way down this path. And it's fascinating over this past couple of years, as we've developed to where we are today, to find that the most successful people have the mindset of how to strategize and work together to support each other through hell or high water. And they're the most successful. It's quite ironic. It's quite not, sorry, maybe ironic, is it? It's normal, but why is it normal? It should be normal that everybody's successful, right? So we just try and help as many people as we can and work more closely, of course, with people at the Systems Plus through the DBM Hub and obviously in the workspaces, and they are the most successful people. Go figure, right? Anyone down here free or hardly putting anything in, you just are sat on the fence, right? You're not going to move. You need to push yourself forward. You need to be the most courageous. So how are we so bullish? Why are we so bullish? What underpins everything I'm going to cover in this next few minutes with regards to geopolitics and macroeconomics? Why every week, while the world is determined to make you despondent and lethargic and frightened and crisis after crisis, why are we so driven and motivated and excited and focused? Why? And how have we sustained that over years and years and years and years? Well, if you know my backstory, you'll know I took a real hiding back in 2008 in one of my businesses. Yeah. And that was all I needed to say, we're not going to carry on like this. Something's going to change, but it isn't going to change because the bosses, banks, and governments have made it change. In fact, today it's even worse than it was in 2008. We made the change. And what did we put that change on? Well, we put it on what are called neutral assets. We put it on sound money. We figured out that no matter what, neutral assets will always go up in price, not necessarily value, but certainly price, as long as they keep printing fiat currency. So we offset currency devaluation and created accretive asset appreciation. And we've done it year over year over year at an average of well over 60 and 70%, just off a number of small assets. The CAGR, the average, compound annual growth rate of just Bitcoin alone in that strategy has been 68% over the past 14 years per year. Did we figure out early on that, yes, that's great, and if we did nothing else but that, we'd be in a great place? Yes, of course we figured that out. Has that been easy? No, just look at this chart. How many times has it been possible to shake out? We use the term shake out. Yeah. Well, this is nothing back in the early 2010s. Look what happened in 2017. Those of you around then, congratulations. Put a one in the chat. Working with us very, very early on. Yeah. Did we get shaken out here? Of course we did. Yeah, we're just human beings. Did we build again? Did we keep dollar cost averaging and go all the way up to these heights here? Yeah, 60 odd thousand days. Yeah, pre-COVID. Up again at COVID. Did we get shaken out here? Of course we did. Of course we did. But did we stop? Obviously not. Or I wouldn't be here right now. And we carried on. We're here today, $100,000, whatever. Are people being shaken out by the slightest whiff of different things because there's so much new money coming into this space every single day, and people don't have all this backstory and all this support mechanism and all this motivation and all this strategic thinking that we offer at DBM? Do people get shaken out? Of course they do. Will that continue forever? Yes. Does it make any difference to us? No. For reasons that we'll explain now, in terms of where we're at with the macro and the geopolitical sentiment in this industry, we're now moved from where we were. Anybody on this call who survived this, the idealist entrepreneurship level, when we were just driving on our own, working as hard as we possibly can to help people understand sound money, we've come through it now. Yeah, we're looking at the horizon, we're looking at the Pacific, we're looking at the West Coast. Because now the institutions, the corporations, the big investors are all in. They're all in. And not just all in because they're speculating or hoping or they've no choice. They understand now that Bitcoin in itself is nothing to do with currency. It's nothing to do with money. It's nothing to do with economics. It's nothing to do with wealth. It's pure energy. It's money energized. It's chaos energized. It's individual empowerment energized. It's individuals learning how to stand up, organize their own household, organize their own street, organize their own village, organize their own town, organize their own county, organize their own country. Bottom up. Gone is top down. We were born into top down diktat. All of us on this call were born into that. Now it's shifted the other way, just in time for us to help, if we do our jobs properly as individuals, our children, our grandchildren, and our great-great-grandchildren. Because we've had a lifetime of putting debt onto our future generations. And Bitcoin gives us the opportunity now to arrest that, be it individually, be it on a community level, or even on a country level. It's happening, and our job is simply to ride it up. I'll show you some more detail on this. So the whole thing is about tailwinds. It's all about moving forwards now and utilizing whatever amount of Bitcoin you have, particularly Bitcoin, as I'll talk about in part 2, where you can actually use that now to create a consistent, ongoing cash flow into your life. And what you do with that cash flow is the skill that we talk about all the time at the income level of the academy. Now, just to remind you, somebody asked me last week, can we make this thing a bit bigger, just to remind people? If people haven't seen this, then, you know, we raised this. In fact, we co-wrote a book on this back in 2022, all about the center of the money supply. And what's interesting is, back then, 5-6 years ago, when we first brought this in as an image into the academy, it was all about, well, yeah, obviously none of us can be the center of the money supply as individuals. It's illegal to print currency, right? But that's not really what we were talking about. What we were talking about was, as is happening now, the businesses, the pension funds, the shareholding, the stock markets, in other words, the banks, and even now the governments, not quite yet at the central banks, but the governments are certainly there now, as they acquire sound money. We always know that gold's been part of this mix, okay? But we came off the gold standard back in 1971. So it's not actually been on gold, even though the central banks have been accruing more gold in the past 10 years than they have ever before. So we know something's shifting, but it never shifts enough, quick enough. It's death by 1,000 cuts. So what we've done over the past decade is ourselves and help other people to acquire what we believed would also be acquired by businesses, pensions, shareholders, banks, and governments, which is now actually happening. Next will come the central banks. But as we'll talk about in a minute, you'll see they're not going to go directly in or publicly in to Bitcoin as a neutral asset. They're going to skirt around the edges because they want their cake and eat it. They want to maintain their hegemony of the fiat currency system. They know they're not going to get central bank digital currencies through very easily, even though they're going to keep trying, such as they are in Europe. But what they are going to do is bring stable coins in. Okay? So if we know that, then we know that we can't really lose, because that's bringing huge amounts of liquidity into the digital space. Inevitably, parts of that are going to end up in Bitcoin. In fact, they already are. And on that basis, if we own Bitcoin, we're owning the center of the money supply. Now, if you're part of that, Tracy, then you just have to get used as a mindset and skill to the need to understand macroeconomics and geopolitics. You don't have to be a fan of it. You don't have to study it maybe as much as we do, but we do this full time. So we're studying it on behalf of a system called the DBM Academy. Hence, I do these calls every week so everybody can get a landscape on how these sea-changing activities are happening, because it's never been more important to own a piece of the center of the money supply. It's never been more important, because now we've indicated, validated, and cast iron rubber stamped, because it's only one more small step for the likes of the Fed to put Bitcoin on its balance sheet. Okay? That's what I mean by being closest to the money supply, which is what we've been talking about for years and years and years. Okay, all that said, macro updates. A lot going on, I'm pleased to say. Okay? We don't get too drowned out by the military complex, right? All you're hearing right now is military complex, is petrodollar, is fiat dollar. Yeah, that's all you're hearing if you're going to listen to the mainstream media. That's why the mainstream media is so dangerous, because it keeps people into this state of perpetual fear. What we do is we go behind the scenes, as we've done for well over a decade, and find as much quality information as we possibly can to build two pictures: a macro level picture, macroeconomics, and a geopolitical picture. And then we look for the connection points between the two. That's what I mean by working on being closest to the money supply. All right. So it's easy for us just to ream through every week lots and lots of interesting snippets of macro information that allows you to walk away from this call informed, motivated, and ready to drive on this week, as we do this every week. Okay. So last week, Coinbase, we're over here in the UK. We're based in the UK, and the UK's semi-related to Europe from a political point of view. Okay, so it's sort of in the middle, the UK, USA, and continental Europe, political Europe. So it's interesting to see Coinbase land in London, because obviously the city of London, which has got nothing to do with London itself, by the way, but the city of London is obviously not going to let this party move on without it, obviously, right? So Coinbase know that. They're in with the policymakers in the UK just last week, ready to competitively enable and assist, just as Coinbase did with the US government back in January, to ensure that the UK positions itself in the global race for digital assets. So that's all you really need to know, right? There's people much bigger and stronger and smarter than any of us who are out there driving the furrow. All we have to do is sit behind it. They're the main wagon. We just follow that wagon, as we've done for decades, right? Companies like Fidelity, everybody knows, another 786 Bitcoin put onto their balance sheet last week. They're just going and going and going and going. These are the big, banks now moving into this space, as I said earlier. Then you've got the company level, the Thai government, the country level, sorry. Thai government, they're looking at tax waivers on profits from Bitcoin. Now, you're going to get more of this, because you're going to find, obviously, you know about the Cayman Islands, you know about tax havens, everybody knows the shenanigans that goes on. The Cayman Islands, being the biggest purchaser of treasuries. It's not the Cayman Islands, obviously. It's the companies that register on the Cayman Islands buying up all these US treasuries. We've known that forever. That's just shifting now to a political country level race for countries that are friendliest to digital assets. Okay? We've been around for a long time. We've known about this forever. But there's countries now racing to get in front of that because obviously they want that energy, that monetary energy to go through their jurisdiction. Yeah? Coinbase, again, a lot of news from Coinbase last week. Seeks SEC approval to offer blockchain based stock trading. Okay? So you've got the NASDAQ, you've got, the different central repositories of stock trading. Coinbase wants a blockchain-based version of that. Logical, right? Imagine the transparency. Imagine being able to, have a look at what people are doing left, right, and centre in absolute transparency. That's what you want. That's what you want. They're not just reports coming out every quarter or every half year. You want to know exactly what's going on in the moment with your assets, obviously. For us, our level that we operate at, does it matter that there's loads and loads of companies going to go onto a blockchain-based stock trading market? Not really, because the whole thing's going to be driven by stable coins and Bitcoin. So we just own the sense of the money supply, right? If we want to get involved with, as we are already, obviously with companies like Metaplanet and Strategy and etc., we're already moving on that. If you want to know more about that, we'll see you in the income subscriptions. But the point is that all the companies that are providing yield now from digital assets in a TradFi sense are something that we're observing very, very closely, working with tightly, so we can sort of take some pressure off the DeFi experiences we've had over the past decade and balance the two areas out, which I think makes sense. Europe's equivalent to Strategy, which is holistically known as a blockchain group, put another 8.2 million into more Bitcoin. So this is every week now, more and more and more and more and more Bitcoin being acquired by these big companies. Ohio, state in the USA, passes the Bitcoin capital gains exemption on purchases over $200. So it's starting, you see. So you've got country level positioning with regards to monetary energy. And Ohio, obviously a state in a country, looking to get ahead, just in a very small way, to put tax exemptions in place for purchases under $200 in digital assets. So the first state in the US to do this. You see where they're going with it all? They understand already that they want the energy going through their jurisdictions, right? The fact that, you should never purchase anything directly with Bitcoin is a moot point, but we'll cover that in more detail going forward. Payments giant, Klarna, okay? Klarna, these people who put people on the never. Yeah, you can even get, what they call it, discounted purchases and payment plans for food these days. I mean, it's just crazy what people are doing, putting food on credit. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. But these guys are now starting to bring Bitcoin payments into their accepted payments methods. Again, the people who don't understand balance sheets and accretion and management and organizing cash flows, they're just going to get drawn into these companies. They're going to be very happy to take the Bitcoin off them. Never sell your Bitcoin. Find ways to create yield from your Bitcoin. Work your balance sheet. Don't directly sell your assets, ever. Talk about that in part 2. And then France, good old France. Yeah, they don't know whether they're coming or going because of their leadership, but that'll all shake out. They've got leaders in there who are part of the old world. They don't really know what they're doing. It's the same with Europe as a whole. So they did a very, very strong consideration last week about repurposing lots of wasted energy. It was of 80 million euros wasted energy through their energy generation, a lot of nuclear going on in France, and they rejected it. It's like Germany selling all the Bitcoin last September, whatever it was. I mean, where do these people get off? They're just not working hard enough or responsibly enough as corporate leaders, as political leaders. They're just not working hard enough. And sooner or later, the people will wake up to this and things will change. It's not going to change top down. Therefore, we change it bottom up. But it is frustrating, if not laughable, when you see all that wasted energy that could easily go in, like Bhutan, to create, 2/3 of Bhutan's GDP now, I think, is created by reallocating energy, unused energy towards Bitcoin mining. What's not to get? Well, France, work harder. You're not doing a good enough job. $16 trillion credit card giant Visa. Okay, we've known Visa's been on this wagon for a while. They're not stupid, obviously. They want to keep the status quo. Of course they do, because they make absolutely millions, if not billions. And that's why they're sponsoring all the big sports events, and all the banks sponsor the big sports events, because they make so much money through fees and transaction incomes. But even they're saying every institution in the world needs a crypto strategy, which is true. Yeah, again, doesn't make too much difference to Visa. They'll find rails, especially through the USDT and the stablecoin approvals that are now going through each country. Started with America last week. Talk about that in a minute. Russian bank giant Sberbank, the country's first Bitcoin-backed bonds. So Russia are moving forward big time now. It puts more and more pressure on the rest of the world. The sanctions that are in place are useless. Absolutely useless. They're just crocodile tears. All that'll start shaking out now, because Russia is way ahead, way ahead. Not just in its GDP, but also how it's politically aligning itself with the BRICS, and also now getting well ahead, much faster than even the USA on the movement of Bitcoin-backed bonds, because the US has to go through a whole process. So does Europe, even worse. A whole bureaucratic process. It takes an age. Luckily, we've got a president over there that can sign things in and accelerate things forwards, which is what's happening. Russia doesn't need to bother with any of that, and neither does China. Okay, so they've got to move much more quickly as they figure out where the future of sound money is. Coinbase unveils their own payments in stable coins for e-commerce platforms. All right, so they're jumping ahead of Visa. They're jumping ahead of all the the Klarnas and all these other companies, and they're putting their own systems in. Yeah, as our Stripe, as we discussed last week. As Des Bhutan, national government, says Bitcoin is a store of value in a medium exchange and a unit of account. Okay, they should know. They've been quietly building out their Bitcoin mining facilities using all the energy that comes down off the Himalayas in their gift. And as I said before, about 2/3 of their GDP now is created through Bitcoin mining, which is phenomenal if you think about it. The strongest country in the world per capita in terms of Bitcoin ownership. Very, very clever. Hats off to Bhutan. Arizona, their house, their voting system passes strategic Bitcoin reserve to create a government Bitcoin fund. All right, again, so like Ohio, like a lot of these states, they're all putting themselves in front of even federal level decisions because they know they have to. The federal is too slow. Very much like Europe, it's too slow. So countries have to take things, or states have to take things into their own hands. It's obvious, absolutely obvious. It's all down to the sophistication of the prime ministers, the presidents, and the governors, depending whether you're working on a state or country level. Okay, it's not difficult to see. It's just a case of us slipstreaming it because we're seeing things way, way ahead of even bosses, banks, and governments. Cardone, Grant Cardone, sees it as a company man. He sees it absolutely, puts another 1,000 Bitcoin on his balance sheet last Friday. That's the first ever real estate stroke Bitcoin company to integrate full Bitcoin strategy, combining the best of the two asset classes. Okay, so 14,200 units of 500,000 square feet of A-star office space. Okay, they're looking to basically tokenize the ability for office space, property space to be funded. Very, very clever move indeed, because obviously, as we've done for years, he's just creating a balance sheet there with 1,000 Bitcoin that will perpetually create the cash flows for him to acquire more and more and more and more property. That's his thing. That's what he's into. That's fine. Yeah, not difficult. We've been doing this with property for nearly 8 years now, with property we own across the United States through tokenization. It's not a new thing, but it's new in terms of just how front and center it is when you've got big companies like Cardone Capital doing it. All right, so we're way ahead of these people. It's just a case of making sure that we own the same asset classes, so we slipstream it, which is why we own Bitcoin. Semler Scientific just announced they're holding a Bitcoin strategy as well. Okay, so much more sophisticated company. 10,000 Bitcoin is their goal by the end of 2025. 105,000 Bitcoin just by the end of 2027. So these now are clear roadmaps, big flashing signals. Went back to that chart before where I showed you the incline of Bitcoin towards 250. This is where it's coming from. This is where it's coming from. All right, because we can see all these companies doing this every day of the week. Again, Coinbase secures a license to offer Bitcoin and crypto services across Europe. All right, that's MiCA. We understand MiCA, we get it. You know, you need regulation, you need some sort of legislation, but it's too damn slow. It's too slow. Coinbase has got in front of it. They've managed now to get a license to do what they need to do, but there's all sorts of things that still need to be done. Okay, it's just too slow. Simple as that. Does it matter to us as individual retail people? Not necessarily. It can get a bit frustrating sometimes because you have to move around your wallets and your exchanges and you're constantly having to diversify the ability to move things around. But it's okay, as long as you're aware of it. That's why we always recommend 5 wallets and 5 exchanges at DBM, as we always have. And last but not least, El Salvador Pacific Airport. You know, we know this. We've seen this in, I think it was Sweden. Trains having all the Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies displayed on the screens. You're now getting El Salvador airports going directly into Bitcoin trading in all currency exchanges. Okay, so basically you can exchange your Bitcoin as soon as you get off the plane in El Salvador. You can exchange your Bitcoin for local currency. You can local currency back to Bitcoin, right? Not that you necessarily need to do that if you understand how to operate professionally in blockchain. You don't need fiat. So, a couple of things I just wanted to highlight in greater detail before we get into the geopolitics that came up this week, just to give some more momentum to this whole point of technological disruption, okay? No less than the Bank of America Global Investment Strategy division this week just put Bitcoin, as you can see on this chart here, they put Bitcoin in the same category as the printing press, right? As World Wide Web, as word processors. You know, I mean, you know, look at how many things have come into our lives in the time we've been on this planet. Quite extraordinary what's been going on in the time we've been alive compared to going back all the way 700 years. We know this, of course. Bitcoin sits there right in the midst of everything. And that's a very big deal, because it is a very, very disruptive technology indeed. And most people don't even know it yet. Go figure. Go figure. It doesn't matter about the money. It doesn't matter about, you know, all the fancy stuff we get up to. It matters that people have to understand just how revolutionary this technology is. Okay? Things are changing exponentially quickly, in case you haven't noticed. And it's going to get even quicker now that AI is with us. Look at the things we can create these days using AI. Quite extraordinary. And AI doesn't care about fiat currency, paper currency. AI will care about electronic sound money. Think about that. Bitcoin's at the beginning of a 10 to 20 year long arc, okay, inside of this, that's going to completely change money from a soft printable thing to an ultra hard bearer digital asset. And we're about 5% of the way in. 5%. Yeah, we're early. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Something else that came up, I don't know if you picked this up, but Mike Saylor was in Prague last week, and he did a great presentation. If you're not following us over at DBMX, then click the link. You'll find the links on this webpage. Get over to X, and you'll see a 45-minute presentation that Saylor did, talking about Bitcoin to 21 million in 21 years with a 21% ARR when a 21% vol. So, you know, he's moving that into synchronicity. It's a bit more like a 28% AIR, right? And a 25% vol, but it doesn't matter. The headline is quite neat. 21 million coins, the total issuance of Bitcoin, $21 million price in, that should say 21 years, sorry. Growing at 21% ARR, annual recurring revenue. That's what we're interested in. As you'll see in part 2, when I show you how we take 0.1 Bitcoin and perpetually leverage even just a 28%, you know, CAGR, or 21% ARR, and just watch that grow. Now, obviously, with a vol, it's not going to do that every month consistently. So you need to work your business and figure out what you're doing to fill in the gaps, right? But as we've seen over the past decade, at an average of 68% CAGR, it's very easy to manage your balance sheet to leverage access to capital flow that then you allocate. So you de-risk the cash, allocate that into cash flow yields and move forwards. And we've done that in loads of different ways. Some good, some bad, some ugly, right? Shoot us. The point is, you're moving your business into position to create a cash flow, all built on sound money. So if you've not yet prepared and had a look at being ready of how to map out, certainly not 21 years, right? Probably more likely 12, despite that typo. Yeah, just map it out over this next 5 to 10 years. It's very easy to see. It's just mathematics. And then you've got a determination to do whatever it takes today, even if we're starting from scratch today, to put as much sound money into your capital reserves, your balance sheet, as you possibly can. That's the motivation behind DCA. That's why by now, as individuals, you should be walking around the place doing what you do in life, constantly measuring everything you do in Bitcoin. Yeah, we're no longer in a state of, I wish you had enough Bitcoin to buy a Lamborghini. It's, I've got enough Bitcoin to buy a Lamborghini. I just don't want one. Yeah, you move, your mindset shifts. And it's a case of putting yourself in that position over a period of time that gives you enough critical mass to grow into this phenomenon. Yeah. And all the companies are doing it, the banks are doing it, the governments are doing it, individuals are doing it. And for those of you on this call, you may well have been doing this already for some time. Okay, so get over to DBMX and have a look at that video. You'll enjoy it. Last but not least is just the final updates from the geopolitical level. As I say, we're not interested in the here and now. We're certainly not interested in wars in Iran. Sorry, another typo. Let's just say Iran. Iran wars, etc. What's going on with Ukraine, etc. Now, it affects us indirectly because we get caught up in the sanctions of the fiat system from a legacy positions and legacy decisions we've taken over the past 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So there is pent up build-up of monetary activity inside the DBM business model, right? But that's okay, as long as you're aware on the big picture how things are shaking out with regards to what's going on with Russian sanctions and Iranian sanctions and fiat sanctions and all the rest of it. As long as you understand that that is a dissolving entity. And in the meantime, we focus on what we can affect, then you're fine. You just keep moving forward. And then bang, out of the blue, when you look at this in terms of annual and 5 years timeframes, out of the blue, we get the Genius Act passed in the Senate last week. Very, very interesting, right? Now, those of you who followed DBM for any length of time will know that we've spent years, especially after 2008, pushing against, fighting, kicking, screaming against the fiat system and wanting independent sovereign control for individuals, not driven by bosses, banks, and governments. What have we learned over that past 10 years, especially in the last 5 years, as we tried to create educational realization systems for individuals to be self-sovereign? We've also figured out that people really don't want to be self-sovereign. They want the benefits of it. They want the easy life. They want press and mate. Yeah. They want everything to be given to them, but they don't want the responsibility. So you end up with this dichotomy. So the way I'm interpreting this Genius Act is 2 ways. Let's talk about the positive way first of all, and then we'll have a look at the less positive, right? The positive thing is obviously the way that this Genius Act provides lots of momentum. It's pretty obvious now that within 12 months, all the major e-commerce companies will operate with stable coins for us to transact with. For those of you who've worked with DBM for some time, you'll know we've been working with USDT for years, right? Years. It's just a case of now everybody else catching that up. So we can see within the next 12 months that all the e-commerce, the major e-commerce companies, your Amazons, etc., they'll accept stable coins because the Genius Act has provided them very clear regulatory compliance for anti-money laundering and know your customer, etc. Clear messaging to consumers that this is a safe way to transact. Ironically, it's even safer than cash. Likely incentives and rebates will come in from the governments to create this momentum. Now, they're doing that because they know that they want the US dollar. Remember, this is a US dollar-based act. Don't forget that. They want the US dollar to maintain its hegemony. Yeah, they want it to be maintained as a world reserve currency, but they know they can't do that in the current system. So they're going to move it across to what are called stable coins in the way we know them as. Right? It doesn't necessarily mean USDT, USDC, by the way. It means a stablecoin version of the US dollar. Okay, so you've got massive opportunities for cross-border, and that's what they want. They want the US dollar to maintain itself as the currency of choice for people in Nigeria and wherever else, right? That's what they want. Now, are they going to get that? Well, I guess we're going to find out. Does it make any difference to us insofar as we already operate with the world's biggest stablecoins? We already understand that they are simply on-ramps for us to maintain our Bitcoin positions. Is that going to be more realized, understood, and welcomed? If not welcomed, just assumed of use by the average Joe Sixpack? Will that bring more monetary energy towards Bitcoin? Of course it will. So on a big picture, right, rather than kicking and screaming, we're welcoming this as a positive step forward. And we're going to be looking for a bonanza in the crypto economy that's going to have a net positive effect on the core sound money of Bitcoin. That's the way we're looking at it. It's like 1999, yeah, when we all looked at the websites and we're all looking at the, you know, the digital race for websites and everything else. Nobody will want to be late to this party. So you're going to find lots and lots and lots of countries led by this, and we'll see what happens next. Okay. So it means self-hosted wallets will explode. DeFi will explode. All right. So we've already got a long track record of understanding DeFi. We know the good, bad, and the ugly about DeFi. We understand smart contracts. We understand smart stable coins. We understand hot wallets, cold wallets, etc. So we're well ahead of it. We'd encourage you guys to know that as well. And we'd also encourage you to double down on your security. Okay. So if you're not keeping it up with the coaches on security and all the work they're doing behind the scenes to help you understand security, including multi-sig, would encourage you to get that done. Bitcoin will explode as the preferred store of value on which all this is built. Again, get over to DBMNX, have a look at what Mike Saylor was talking about in Prague last week, and understand how all this monetary energy in the end ends up in a store of value. Not gold anymore, yeah, not treasuries, not bonds, not being frittered away in the fiat system when they print currency or manipulate interest rates or inflation rates. It's all going to come down to sound money. Yeah, that's why you need to be doubling down on Bitcoin as quick as you can. Okay, whatever it shakes out, sovereignty will be in the ownership of the supply of money. Okay, combination of gold, physical gold, and Bitcoin. Bitcoin's the main one. Now, that's the positive end of the Stablecoin Act. Arguably a less positive side, the twist, is big banks looking to retain control in that. So JP Morgan, for example, they're a bank. They sit around the central bank, the Fed, in this particular example. The banks are not going to give up without a fight. They've made an absolute killing over the past 50 years, particularly, of leveraging and fiscal experimenting with all sorts of different ways to cut hundreds of dollars out of $1. So every $1 of your effort, these guys are making hundreds of dollars. We all know that. They're not going to give that up. We know that as well. So straight away, JP Morgan go out there and put in a tender, a launch program for their JPMD, JPM Morgan dollar. We don't know what the D stands for, but I suspect it means dollar. So where does this take us? Well, obviously, if we're aware of it, we're aware of it. We don't need to interface with JP Morgan and Bank of America and NatWest and HSBC or any of the other banks that are going to do this over the next 3 months. We don't need to work with them. I've always said, vote with your feet. Become your own bank, organize your own affairs, become self-sovereign, and do what you want to do. Are the majority of people going to do that? No. Will they get embroiled into digital energy through this type of mechanism? Yes. Is that a benefit to us as the owners of the core money supply? Yes. Are we going to get involved with it necessarily? Probably not. Would we have got involved with central bank digital currencies, or will we if they're forced through? Probably. But does it really matter if we see the separation and we just dip in and out of the fiat system as opposed to being 100% reliant on the fiat system? That's the discussion here. Okay, so they serve a role. Stable coins currently reinforce the dollar as a medium of exchange. That's what I've been saying. That's what they want. They want the hegemony to be transferred to stablecoin rails as opposed to old-fashioned fiat rails. Bitcoin is gaining adoption as a sort of value, and it can function as an exchange of value itself. Although we don't encourage people to use Bitcoin to purchase things, you should be using what Bitcoin produces to purchase things. Both have different roles for now, but they're both growing at the same reason, right? The reason JPMD is in existence, the reason the Genius Act is in existence, the reason Bitcoin is in existence is because of fiat dysfunction, obviously. So what's interesting is this Trojan horse theory, where we thought Bitcoin would be the Trojan horse to move away from the full fiat system. That's what we thought, and that still might be the case. But what seems to be happening is that the stable coins are now the Trojan horse. And whether it's a Trojan horse in the sense of the Genius Act in its purest form, that might be overstating it. But we're certainly looking at a Trojan horse when it comes to the likes of JP Morgan, trying to disrupt things for their own benefit. Right? They're trying to break into the citadel for their own benefit. They're not doing it for the good of others. We know that, right? Either way, it leads to hyper-Bitcoinization. And that's why you have to own the sound money. You have to be in the center of the money supply. That's the point of this strategy. To finish, the next big expectations we have that will drive Bitcoin through all-time highs, as we've said for a few weeks now, will be the expected interest rate cuts from the Fed themselves. Most of the established nations in the world have been cutting multiple times already in 2025. The Fed hasn't cut once yet. And it all comes back to this brinkmanship. The fact that they can't wait much longer is just benefit to us because we just DCA anyway. We're constantly building our balance sheets anyway. We're constantly reallocating funds anyway. We're not interested in what's going on with temporary pullbacks because people haven't got diamond hands and they don't understand anything. Better news, they're selling. We're not interested in any of that. We see dips as buying opportunities. Why? Because as soon as the next Fed rate cuts, that's going to be the green light for the next wave of price discovery in Bitcoin in this cycle. Okay, and as you'll see in part 2, we can manage the cycles. We mentioned Texas officially signed its strategic Bitcoin reserve into law last week, and it's official now. It was done last week, so that's great to see. Like I said before, the amount of Bitcoin Bhutan is mining is equivalent to 1/3, sorry, 1/3, not 2/3, 1/3 of their GDP, which is astonishing. It's an astonishing achievement if you think about it logically. The BRICS are striking back. Okay, what does that mean? Well, as I said earlier, BRICS headed by Russia and China, the global south, they're now figuring out, as we're seeing manifest itself right now in the Middle East, they don't need to be reliant on US treasuries anymore. Right? They're dumping them. And this will have big consequences for the IMF. A lot of countries are putting 2 fingers up to the IMF now. The IMF's bullying people. No, you can't buy Bitcoin. If you buy Bitcoin, we're going to reduce the loans coming into you and your country will go to hell in a handcart, just like they did with most of South America for the past 40 years. The countries are now saying, get lost. Get lost. So that's what's happening there, even to the scale of China. Okay, and the US know it, which is why they've hurried through the Genius Act. China will rapidly be offloading US dollar assets, slashing treasury holdings by 44%. Okay, and they have done that now for the last decade. We've known that as well. Okay, we've just had nowhere to go and slipstream it with. But now that we've got, ironically, the US spearheading changes to the economic landscape that moves in our favor, you're now finding countries find other ways to do it above and beyond. Okay, so on a macro geopolitical level, keep your ear to the ground and make sure you don't get left behind. So we're now going to go into part 2 of this call. To get into part 2 and have a look at how we take all that information and put it into practical reality, okay, then you can click the link below, get yourself as a minimum of a system subscription, and you can join the inner circle that we have at the DBM Academy, where we talk about this stuff in much more free ways, because obviously it's a private entity. We're not publicly on YouTube like we are right now. We've got lots and lots of things we do. Hopefully you learned something today, and we'll see you on the next call.